There's an update on Newcastle United's pursuit of Joao Pedro to discuss on today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, as well as another alternative who might be available for the same price that I think Newcastle should definitely consider. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Yesterday's video got over 2,500 views, which has really blown my mind. More subscribers joined as well, so if you haven't already, please hit like on this video and subscribe. It really does help, as I always say. Today we're going to discuss more about Joao Pedro and a little bit about an alternative player that I really think Newcastle should sign, as I mentioned in the intro. Somebody who Newcastle have been interested in the past, and I'm sure you've seen in the headline and on the thumbnail who that is, but we'll talk about him in a minute. First of all, an update on Joao Pedro. Luke Edwards saying in the Telegraph that Newcastle are ready to have formal talks with Brighton over the player, and the valuation of £60 million is crucially not a deal breaker. So this one does feel like it may be stepping up. Obviously, if they are keen to pay that money for Joao Pedro, then I can see this one fully moving on. When this first emerged, I genuinely thought that it was a non-starter. I think I said that in the actual video, because the price tag wasn't right. The position that he would be playing wouldn't make sense. Maybe there'll be a formation change. Maybe there's just a need for a versatile player, because Joao Pedro is exactly that. And I remember Newcastle being very heavily linked with Matheus Cunha earlier on in the springtime before he joined Manchester United, and the reason was because he can play up front, he can play out wide, and he can play as a number 8 in midfield. Joao Pedro's extremely similar in that sense, that he's very versatile. He does make a lot of sense as a profiled player, but anyhow, it's quite clear by the sounds of it that he's not necessarily wedded to this idea of a left-footed right winger anymore, by the fact that he's also interested in signing Anthony Elanga, who's also not left-footed. So that need for versatile, that need for opportunism that happened 2 years ago with that window, that everyone sort of went into it expecting Newcastle to solve the right-hand side issue and expecting Newcastle to solve the centre-back issue. And they spent their money elsewhere on players that were not as obviously needed, in terms of fullbacks that weren't going to come and play first-team football immediately. And Sandro Tonali was an exceedingly good midfielder, so the team evolved through the recruitment. Harvey Barnes coming on the left as well, not solving the right-hand side issue. I think all of those signings have eventually proven to be the correct one. Maybe this is what Newcastle are looking for. Again, that opportunism, that ability to play different ways and evolve the team away from the current structure, change in formation. I know that I've vocally said about needing a number 10. Maybe that's what Joao Pedro has been more earmarked for, as well as being another option who can play instead of Isak as well. There's been rumours that he wants to move to London, with Arsenal and Chelsea apparently interested. I think Newcastle will not fear that. I think the fact that they are now moving on to this, the way that these things move, is that they'll have got a sense that Joao Pedro is open to this, and I think that is the feeling. Brighton relationship seems to be deteriorating a little bit after the end of last season. This one does feel like it's possible, especially if Newcastle aren't balking at that £60 million fee. Whether they'll talk around it to get it down to sort of 50 million, but let me know in the comment section if you think that is the right deal to do, whether you think that that's the right thought process. But maybe that's what Newcastle are looking for, a player who can play in different roles, who can play in different positions, and although he doesn't automatically solve the right hand side issue by being an inverted winger, perhaps there are other avenues to look at. And as I said yesterday, Johan Bakayoko, who's a player that Newcastle have been interested in before, is available for around €20 million, which is an incredible fee really for the quality of player here. So if that is true, then perhaps they'll look at that as well as a sort of cheaper option to have that inverted winger. But versatility and quality upgrade seems to be the way forward, and Newcastle are not crucially bulking at this fee. So we'll see where this goes, but it seems to be progressing in a positive direction to an end that sees Joao Pedro finally playing in a Newcastle United shirt next season. As I say, let me know in the comment section what you think. So given the parameters I've just discussed about versatility, maybe the left footer not being the crucial element here and the opportunism. There's another option I think Newcastle should seriously consider, which is Xavi Simons from RB Leipzig. The 22-year-old attacking midfielder can play on the right and the left, can play centrally up front as well, across the front three. 17 goal contributions for RB Leipzig last season. According to The Athletic this morning on their deal sheet, he wants to leave the German club, who will not be playing in Europe next season, and there's a real opportunity to sign him. He's obviously just joined them. Newcastle were keen to sign him last summer. They wanted to be kept in the loop on what was happening when he was at PSG. There would be a lot of interest in Simons, but there's been some talk this week about Newcastle maybe being in the market to sign a player like a Tonali, like an Alexander Isak, off the radar. Really, really high ceiling. That type of player who's got world-class ceiling. I think Xavi Simons really fits that bill. Given that Newcastle have been interested in the past, there's a real opportunity, I think, for this one to actually happen. So if Newcastle were to push for this, as I say, his value is around £60 million. It's roughly the same as Joao Pedro. 86th percentile for progressive passes, 82nd percentile for shot creating actions, defensively, clearances, aerial duels won as well. He's willing to put himself about, and for me, as I say, this really would feel like the optimum deal to do. So creative, such a good dribbler. Crucially, is right-footed again, but so doesn't immediately solve the issue of the inverted winger. But as I say, different parameters which appear to be in play here. Even Newcastle are going back to that opportunism, that desire to maybe have squad players who are versatile, who can play in different positions, and this really does feel like the sort of deal that would bring that. And as I say, for the same price as Joao Pedro, the fact that he's got Champions League experience has played for top clubs. It'd be a huge undertaking to convince him to join. I'm not saying that Newcastle would find this deal easy at all. If he is available, if he does want to leave, and as I say, Leipzig have no European football, so there's a possibility that he is available this summer, even though Leipzig are also likely to cash in on Benjamin Sesko as well. The fact that he has all that on his CV and the fact that he has that going for him, I think suggests that Newcastle would very much be interested in a deal for this player if it was doable. And they may well, having shown interest last summer, they may well look at this again. This is just my hunches. This is just what I think that they should do. I'm not saying that it will happen at all, but I think there's a real opportunity. Slightly different player to Pedro. I think he's more of a midfielder than a striker, but he plays in similar positions. He shot to stardom last summer with that goal against England, and as I say, this feels very much like Sandro Tonali and Alexander Isak sort of realm of player who has such a high ceiling at the right age, 22 years old, for a club that Newcastle are an obvious progression from. He wants to leave. Newcastle can offer Champions League football, and crucially, he's on around £100,000 a week, which means that he could join Newcastle and fit into the existing wage structure with a wage increase, which I think is really, really crucial as well. So he's the player that I think Newcastle maybe, instead of Joao Pedro, is another option, as that sort of, if Newcastle are able to go and buy a player in the sort of mould of Tonali or Isak, that shock sign, that big name who takes Newcastle to the next level, Xavi Simons has got to be an option for that, especially considering he seems to be available for the same price, or roughly the same price, as Joao Pedro. And as I say, his ceiling for me is absolutely much higher than Pedro's. He feels like the sort of player, if Newcastle were to ever get into the latter stages of the Champions League or challenge for the Premier League title, those players would be in the team. Are we really sure that Joao Pedro would be? Are we really sure that Joao Pedro's ceiling is that high? For me, it's not. I think he's a very good player. I think he certainly improves Newcastle. I think his versatility is good. I think he's going to go to the next level if he joins Newcastle. But Xavi Simons is a world-class player in the making, in my opinion. The fact that he, according to The Athletic, wants to leave Leipzig, I think there's a quiet acceptance that he will leave. Then Newcastle should definitely be in the queue to sign him. As I say, it may be difficult to deal with if Bayern Munich or Barcelona or PSG want him back, or Manchester City show interest, or anything like that. Liverpool, all these clubs who have been previously linked with him, who have a lot more to offer financially and in terms of club progression. Newcastle would still be an upgrade for him, I think. So Xavi Simons is a player that I think Newcastle should sign. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode. We'll be back tomorrow after the fixtures are announced as well. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.